It's early afternoon on Wednesday, January 21st, and something extraordinary is unfolding in global markets. For anyone who has spent a lifetime watching markets, truly watching them, something feels profoundly different. Gold has just printed yet another all-time high, $4,884 per ounce, extending a rally that now feels less like speculation and more like quiet panic. But while gold grabs the headlines, something far more important is happening beneath the surface. Silver, the metal that spent decades trapped in a frustrating range, recorded 5 separate all-time highs in just the first 19 days of 2026. 5. In 19 days. Silver is currently trading near $94.68 per ounce, up more than 33% year-to-date, after already rising nearly 150% in 2025. For a metal that spent most of the last half-century trapped, suppressed, ignored, and misunderstood, this is extraordinary. I've listened to nearly every major voice in this space over the years, from the old-school monetary historians to the mining executives to the analysts who spent decades explaining why silver mattered long before anyone cared to listen. For years, those arguments felt early. Not wrong, just early. But what we are witnessing now is not a price move. It is the slow, unmistakable sound of confidence breaking. Because silver does not move violently when the world is stable. Silver moves violently when systems begin to fail under their own weight. And right now, the world is entering one of those moments. To understand why silver and gold are responding the way they are, we must step back from charts and ask a more important question. What happens to money when geopolitics becomes unstable? And more importantly, what happens when that instability comes from the very nations that once anchored the global system? Because this rally is not being driven by optimism, it's being driven by chaos. A sudden escalation in US, European trade tensions, a geopolitical power struggle over Greenland, threats of tariffs between historic allies, and growing fractures in the global monetary order. Before we go deeper, make sure you're subscribed. These are not normal markets. And what's unfolding now will matter far more in hindsight than it appears in real time. Because to understand why silver is exploding higher, we need to talk about Greenland. For much of the modern era, investors were taught to treat geopolitics as background noise. Wars were contained. Trade disputes were temporary. Diplomacy, we were told, always found its way back. But history teaches something very different. Every major monetary reset, without exception, has been preceded by geopolitical stress. Not ideology, not elections, but conflict between powers over resources, territory, and control. That is precisely what we are seeing again. Because what's unfolding right now is not about Greenland itself. It is about who controls the future architecture of power. Greenland is the world's largest island. At over 2.2 million square kilometers, it's roughly 6 times the size of Germany, yet home to just 56,000 people, most of them indigenous Inuit communities. 80% of the landmass is covered in ice. But what lies beneath that ice, and where the island sits geographically, is what makes it one of the most strategically valuable locations on Earth. Greenland sits between North America and the Arctic. That positioning makes it critical for early missile warning systems, monitoring Arctic naval routes, tracking Russian and Chinese activity, controlling future shipping lanes as polar ice melts. The United States has operated Patuxent Space Base, formerly Thule Air Base, since World War II. It's one of the most important early warning installations in the Western Hemisphere. During the Cold War, the U.S. even explored deploying nuclear weapons on the island. And now, in 2026, Greenland has returned to the center of global power politics. As ice retreats, Greenland's vast mineral resources, rare earth elements, uranium, iron, ore, and potentially oil and gas, are becoming strategically reachable. China knows this, Russia knows this, and Donald Trump knows this. Which brings us to the event that lit the fuse. In recent days, President Donald Trump has reignited and dramatically escalated his demand that the United States obtain control of Greenland. Publicly, he says this is about national security. Privately, the implications are far larger. Following a controversial U.S. military operation in Venezuela, Trump intensified his rhetoric and then took it further. He is threatening escalating tariffs on 8 European countries: Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Finland. His terms are blunt. Tariffs of 10% beginning February 1st, rising to 25% by June, unless these nations support America's plan to purchase Greenland. For someone who has followed markets for decades, this is where alarm bells truly begin to ring. Because trade is not just commerce. Trade is trust. And when trade becomes a weapon, trust collapses quickly. And that's exactly what is currently unfolding. On Monday, Trump sent a letter to Norway's Prime Minister, Jonas Gahr Støre, which is now sending shockwaves through the market and the global economy at large. Dear Jonas, Trump begins in his letter. Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel any obligation to think purely of peace. Although peace will always be predominant, I must now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China. And why do they have a right of ownership anyway? There are no real documents. Only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we had boats landing there too. I have done more for NATO than any person since its founding. Now I must do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you, President DJT. This is not normal diplomacy. This is geopolitical brinkmanship between allies that have stood together for over 250 years. And Europe is not taking it lightly. Germany's finance minister responded almost immediately. We will not allow ourselves to be blackmailed. France's finance minister was even more direct. We are living through uncharted territory. We have never seen an ally use tariffs as a geopolitical weapon. His German counterpart added, a line has been crossed. Europe must be prepared. Suddenly, the soft approach Europe has taken since Trump's return to the White House is rapidly collapsing. Behind closed doors, EU officials have reportedly begun discussing retaliatory measures, potentially 93 billion euros in tariffs, or even restricting American banks and technology firms from Europe's single market. This is no longer posturing. This is structural stress between economic power blocks. And markets understand exactly what that means. When trade becomes a weapon, when diplomacy breaks down, when tariffs replace trust, capital runs for cover. As tensions erupted, global stock markets fell, the dollar weakened, and money rushed toward assets that do not depend on political goodwill. Gold surged to $4,690, then $4,722. In every crisis I've lived through as an investor, the Asian financial crisis, the dot-com collapse, the global financial crisis, the pandemic, gold always speaks first. Not because it is emotional, but because it has no counterparty risk. As trade tensions escalate, capital have begun flowing rapidly into gold, not as speculation, as protection. Gold has surged to over $4,700 per ounce, extending a multi-year rally built on exploding sovereign debt, central bank balance sheet expansion, rising geopolitical fragmentation, declining trust in fiat currencies. Gold is the metal of institutions. But silver is something different. Because silver is not just a monetary metal, it is also deeply embedded in solar infrastructure, electric vehicles, electronics, grid expansion, defense systems. When geopolitical conflict rises, silver gets hit from both sides. Monetary demand rises because trust falls. Industrial demand rises because nations rearm and reindustrialize. At the same time, it has served as money for thousands of years. That combination makes silver uniquely sensitive to disorder. When confidence erodes and industrial demand rises simultaneously, silver does not creep higher. It gaps. That is what we are witnessing now. 5 all-time highs in 19 days. After decades of stagnation. This is not speculation. This is repricing. This is why silver loves chaos. And nowhere is that clearer than in Asia. Over the years, I've learned one critical lesson. Watch what the East does, not what it says. Over the past 4 months, India has imported nearly $5.9 billion worth of silver. That's a 400% increase from late 2024. To put that in perspective, from 2013 to 2019, India averaged just $1.5 billion per year. Now it's doing nearly 4 times that. in a single quarter. India is one of the largest silver-consuming nations on Earth. Demand comes from jewelry fabrication, physical investment, electronics, solar expansion, but here's the part that matters most. India is buying silver at record prices, not waiting for dips, not hesitating, because well-informed buyers don't care about price, they care about availability. And the pricing signals coming out of India are unlike anything seen in modern history. A major anomaly is now developing. Indian MCX silver futures are trading near $113 per ounce. Shanghai silver prices are near $103. Western COMEX prices? Around $94. Let that sink in. MCX, $113. SHFE, $103. COMEX, $94. This is not normal. Historically, silver prices have remained tightly aligned globally. An $8 to $19 premium, sustained, is almost unheard of. Even more telling, Indian silver ETFs, which had traded at discounts for months, are now shifting back into a premium versus global spot. The last time this happened? October, when JP Morgan reportedly failed to deliver silver into India. Premiums do not appear because of enthusiasm. They appear because metal cannot be sourced. Markets are quietly telling us something. Physical silver is becoming difficult to obtain, even at record prices. And the East is willing to pay whatever is necessary. Premiums are not emotional indicators. They are logistical ones. They reveal scarcity. They reveal delivery stress. They reveal pressure beneath the surface. When Indian ETFs shift back into premium after months of discount, it tells us that physical demand is overwhelming paper supply once again. I've waited decades to see this happen at scale, and it's about to get even bigger. Before we close, we need to slow this down and ask the most important question of all. What does this actually mean? Not in theory, not for markets, but for the real world. Because what's unfolding right now is not just a metals rally. It is a stress test of the global financial system itself. At the global level, the system is fragmenting in real time. For decades, the world operated on a shared assumption that trade, finance, and diplomacy were ultimately cooperative, even when tensions flared. That assumption is breaking. When tariffs are used as leverage between allies, when access to markets becomes conditional, and when geopolitical pressure overrides commercial logic, the global economy stops behaving like a single system and starts behaving like competing blocks. Capital becomes cautious, supply chains become political, and money begins to favor neutrality over productivity. This is why gold and silver are responding now, not because growth is accelerating, but because coordination is deteriorating. This fragmentation has profound consequences. A global economy built on trust can tolerate high debt, long supply chains, and financial leverage. A fragmented world cannot. In a divided system, countries hoard strategic materials, prioritize domestic resilience over efficiency, and quietly reduce dependence on foreign currencies and institutions. That process is inflationary by nature, even without growth. It raises costs, distorts pricing, and makes financial shocks harder to contain. Precious metals thrive in this environment not because they produce cash flow, but because they exist outside the trust-based system that is now eroding. For Americans, this shift hits closer to home. The United States has long benefited from being at the center of the global order, issuing the reserve currency, attracting foreign capital, and importing goods cheaply. But when trade becomes confrontational and alliances strain, those advantages weaken. A weaker dollar is not a policy choice. It is a market response. Imported goods cost more. Financing deficits become harder. Interest rates stay higher for longer, not because the economy is strong, but because confidence demands compensation. For the average American, this shows up as persistent cost of living pressure, unstable financial markets, and savings that quietly lose purchasing power even when nominal numbers appear higher. It also changes how Americans experience risk. In stable periods, risk feels optional, something investors choose. In unstable periods, risk becomes unavoidable. Retirement accounts fluctuate more violently. Equity markets react not just to earnings, but to headlines and policy threats. And the tools people once relied on, diversification, bonds, cash, stop providing the same protection they did in the past. This is the environment where tangible, non-financial assets quietly regain relevance, not as a bet, but as a counterweight. For everyday gold and silver buyers, especially retail holders, this moment carries a very different meaning than a simple price rally. What you are seeing is not enthusiasm chasing returns. It is availability risk being repriced. When premiums emerge, when Eastern markets pay materially more than Western paper prices, and when physical metal flows toward long-term holders rather than trading desks, the market is signaling stress beneath the surface. This matters because retail buyers do not compete with hedge funds. They compete with supply. And supply, once constrained, does not respond quickly to price. This is why price matters less than access in moments like this. Well-informed physical buyers are not trying to time tops or bottoms. They are responding to a changing environment where trust is thinning, delivery matters more than contracts, and ownership outside the financial system carries a premium. For them, gold and silver are not trades. They are insurance against systemic uncertainty. Not fear-driven, not emotional, but rational in a world where financial guarantees increasingly depend on political stability. So when silver moves the way it is moving now, it is not sending a message about tomorrow's price. It is sending a message about today's system, about confidence, coordination, and control. And that is why this moment feels different. Not euphoric, not speculative, but deliberate, as if markets, institutions, and individuals are all quietly preparing for a world that no longer behaves the way it used to. This is the lens through which everything we've discussed must be understood. Because once you see it this way, the metals rally stops looking dramatic and starts looking inevitable. Chaos is not coming. Chaos is already here. And silver has always thrived in exactly this environment. If you found value in this breakdown, make sure you like the video, share it, and subscribe, because what's unfolding in the metals market right now is not a trade. It's a transformation, and we are only at the beginning.